Welcome back to the channel. In this video, we'll be looking at how we can add suspense to our writing. So turn off the lights, grab a lovely cup of tea, and let's jump into the realm of suspense, shall we? Suspense is a technique used by writers in a variety of different genres. Although it is more commonly found in horror, mystery, and thriller stories, it can be found in science fiction, fantasy, and more. This is because it can play an important role in any kind of genre, any kind of fiction or type of storytelling, whether that's for the short story that you're writing or the game you are developing. There are also different kinds of suspense for different kinds of fiction, for different... This is getting a little bit wordy, isn't it? Suspense has a variety of different roles in your writing, but its prime function is to affect the experience of the reader. And that's what I'm going to break down in today's video. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the different types of suspense that you can create, and also give you some techniques and methods of how to add this kind of suspense to your stories.
Get on with it. Yes, get on with it!
Suspense is the method in which a writer can add tension to the scene of a story, or sometimes even the whole story itself. And it can also conceal answers that you don't want the audience to know just yet. Suspense can also help in the creation of twists or reveals within your story, and arguably its most important function is to keep readers invested and engaged in your story. You want them to keep turning those pages after all. Long-term suspense. Long-term suspense usually exists throughout the entire life of a story up until a twist is revealed or the answer to a question is beginning to present itself. And this naturally happens in a wide variety of different stories, and it usually unfolds at the same pace as the story itself. Long-term suspense keeps readers interested because they want to know the answers as much as the characters do. As long as your characters are well written, that is. The downside of long-term suspense is ultimately in the big reveal of the answer that you give the audience. The answer, the twist, the conclusion of a story, it needs to be satisfying enough and make enough sense, otherwise it won't be satisfying enough for the reader. The answer, the twist, the payoff, the conclusion of the story needs to be satisfying enough for the reader, otherwise it can leave a bad taste in the mouth. It needs to make sense, and you need to use foreshadowing enough so that the audience can connect the dots by the end. But it needs to be done with subtlety. Also, with long-term suspense, it's very easy to fall in the trap of cliches and tropes. It's also recommended to read widely in your chosen genre, so you understand what other writers are doing and have done before, so that you can make yours a little bit more original as well. A popular technique recently is many writers having multiple threads of suspense throughout their stories, which all come together in the end, creating a very satisfying payoff. For example, in The Shining, we have the warnings given to the characters about the Overlook Hotel, and we also have the drinking and slow burning insanity of Jack Torrance. These questions and answers collide at the end of the movie, where we get that satisfying conclusion. Short-term suspense. Short-term suspense, just as its namesake, is the total opposite of long-term suspense. Short-term suspense is usually heightened and happens in a single moment or scene. Typically, we see this in scenes where characters are challenged by antagonistic forces, or they face important obstacles within their hero's journey. A single chapter is usually the shortest that short-term suspense will be. Usually it's within a single scene. Short-term suspense assists the flow of your writing, the pacing of it, and especially affects the experience of the reader and may engage or excite them further, if done well. A great example of short-term suspense could be, for example, the protagonist is about to find out who his true birth father is, but the city is invaded at that precise moment and he has to find out later, or he may lose that opportunity forever. Usually when the protagonist or characters face danger or high-stakes situations. The third type is mystery suspense. This kind of suspense is usually the kind that people think of when they think of suspense as a literary technique. Mystery novels, detective stories, and other stories utilize this kind of suspense well, but it can be used in any genre too. This kind of suspense usually happens when the writer is concealing specific information from the reader, and the answer to that mystery, or the answer of the secret truth, as it were, and this truth usually spans the entire story. Perfect example here being you would find this kind of mystery suspense in Sherlock Holmes novels and Agatha Christie novels. The mystery is at the heart of the plot, and the answer is the key to the conclusion. And the audience is kept in the dark. Mostly.
And they mostly come at night. Mostly.
However, like long-term suspense, you have to really think carefully about foreshadowing, because you need to have enough clues within the story that the mystery makes sense. Otherwise, again, it could be dissatisfying for your readers. Horror suspense. Horror suspense is the most common in the horror genre. It's a bit obvious. This is expressed usually when the reader knows that something bad will happen, or they know that a monster will jump out of the corner at that specific moment, but they don't know exactly when or what it will be. The exact nature of the thing is unknown to the audience. I actually covered horror suspense in quite a lot of depth in my horror concepts video, so check that out, it'll be above somewhere. Basically, if the reader or the characters themselves are uncertain as what will happen and why, usually you have horror suspense. Now, light suspense. Light suspense, again, like all of these, can apply to any sort of genre, but it occurs mostly in romance stories and comedies. This is created when a reader, again, is waiting an answer for a question in a story, but instead of being a Cthulhian abomination of total nightmare, it's much lighter in nature, hence light suspense. Think of it as a will they, won't they kind of a question, rather than a will this abomination that awakens destroy the world kind of thing. Again, will they, won't they? Think of your typical romance story where there's a female and a male character, or male and male, or female and female, whatever. Or Cthulhu and a cultist. They are trying to get together, or they have feelings for each other, but they don't act out on those feelings because of social situations, etc. They cannot be together, they don't express their feelings, but by the end they are challenged, they overcome their obstacles, and they get together. And in the comedy genre, light suspense is usually when a character is put into a situation where we as an audience or as a reader, we know exactly what's going to happen because they're total idiots or because they're buffoons, but the character themselves do not know. This is creating suspense for the reader because they know what's going to happen. It's already foreshadowed by the personality of the characters. Right, this is kind of a brief overview of the most typical types of suspense. Now let's talk about a few techniques that you can use on how to add suspense to your writing. The primary methods of creating suspense are setting up a question, limiting the perspective, the setting, style and form, dramatic irony, and cliffhangers. Setting up the question is a typical staple of creative writing workshops and courses throughout the world, and nobody taught it or said it better than Lee Child. As novelists, we should ask or imply a question at the beginning of the story, and then we should delay the answer. Setting up a question at the beginning of the story can engage and hook the reader into wanting to know that answer, therefore engaging them and making them want to read the story to find out those answers. This lends itself to long-term and mystery suspense, but can work with others too, and typically does. These kind of questions from the onset may include: why did Harry Potter survive? When will she realize the truth about her partner? What is the creature that lives in the well? These are great examples of setting a question at the beginning of a novel. However, you still need to write interesting, engaging characters, otherwise the reader won't care enough. H.P. Lovecraft was a master at limiting the perspective of his characters and of his stories. So much so that the limiting of the perspective actually created suspense in itself. Limiting the perspective to a single character makes it a lot easier to conceal information from your reader than if you had a story with multiple perspectives. This also allows you to better control the pace at which the audience experiences your narrative. However, if you don't want to go that route, you can make sure the character is an unreliable narrator, so the audience is second guessing everything. Again, just make sure that conclusion is good, and make sure that the narrator is not omniscient, obviously. The setting that you choose to include in a scene, or the moment that you're including suspense, definitely affects the engagement of the reader as well. Why did Bram Stoker choose a castle? Why are there so many thrillers and mysteries set in Victorian London? The locations, areas, buildings, and even weather themselves lend themselves to this area of mystery, to the atmosphere. Simple things like fog, mist, and rain can add tension to a story because it limits the senses of the character, and therefore the perspective at which the reader experiences the story. Just try not to fall into the cliche here and include fog, mist, and rain in every single horror moment within your novel. Unless fog is a huge part of that story, obviously. Your sentence structures and the way that you write can also affect the way in which suspense is conveyed to the audience as well. Pauses, shorter sentences, long freight train sentences that add so much crucial information and do a bit of an expo dump on the reader. The lengths of your sentences and the connectives that you choose to use can definitely affect the pacing and therefore affect the intensity or the speed of a scene. All of this helps in the building of tension within that moment, and it can be even used to dramatic effect to punctuate certain moments in a story as well. Just don't get carried away with long freight train sentences. Nobody likes those. Please don't hate me in the comments for that one. Now let's look at dramatic irony. Sweet dramatic irony is when you reveal part of the answer or part of the truth to your audience, but not the characters. For example, at the beginning of the story, you may mention to the audience that there is a shotgun above the local pub's bar. In and of itself, the audience will know that the item is there or the object exists, but may not think of anything of it at that specific moment until it becomes important to the story. Or they'll go the total opposite and they'll be questioning when and how it will be used, because clearly it's been shown for a reason. This kind of technique is particularly strong. However, you need to have a very subtle use of foreshadowing to pull it off correctly. You don't want to ram anything down your audience's throats. Second to last, cliffhangers. Cliffhangers are common knowledge at this point within history of mankind, but these are the moments of your story where you cut off during the middle of a dramatic situation, or you hold back on that critical information until later because something else occurs. Cliffhangers can often be very satisfying for writers to create, and they often think of themselves as very clever for doing so. However, definitely test your ideas out on friends and family or people who are writers and of who you trust their opinion. This is because a cliffhanger needs to be satisfying enough and exciting to potentially want a second story or the next moment to occur. Actually, this is probably just a great general tip in general. Just test out your ideas on people. See what works, see what doesn't, and analyze why. It's actually one of the reasons why I love role-playing so much, is because as a writer I get to test out so many different ideas. I can see how my players react to those situations, if they engage with those situations, or if they just kind of want to go around those situations and just create their own fun. There's a reason why or why not they do engage with them. So I think as a writer, probably role-playing is a very useful analyzing tool, at least, or educational tool. I think most writers should do it. Well, at least I'm a proponent for it anyway. Anyway, what was the point of this video again? Sorry. Foreshadowing. I've mentioned this a few times throughout now, but careful foreshadowing is when you leave little breadcrumbs, little clues as to what will happen or what the answer or the truth is of the question that you established at the beginning of the story. And you have to practice this if you want to become a master at writing suspense. Just make sure you don't become heavy-handed with this technique, because you could create a lot of red herrings for the reader also, unless red herrings are part of the story and what you want the characters and readers to experience. Let's summarize everything so far. There are different kinds of suspense: long-term, short-term, mystery, horror, and light. Create a question at the beginning of your story and have the audience waiting for the answer. Foreshadow the answer or the twist carefully by revealing hints throughout. Use short-term suspense throughout to affect the pacing. Do this by putting characters in uncertain, dangerous, or high-stakes situations. Change your structure of your sentences and flow of the writing to match the suspense you are wanting to create. It just takes practice to get better at adding suspense to your writing. But I believe if you write more, try it out in short stories, try it out in your novels. If you practice these methods and techniques, I promise you that you'll become a better writer of suspense. And also, if you want to learn more about other writing and storytelling tips, or even some role-playing advice, check out my writing and storytelling playlist. And please like this video if you've enjoyed the content today, if you found it entertaining, or, well, not entertaining, but educational, I would say. I always want to try and share as much of my experiences and things that I found that helped me to kind of overcome these different concepts, especially as newer writers. And please subscribe so you don't miss out on any future content. I am planning on releasing more videos. I've got 5 videos in the works at the moment. And please share this video on social media, on Reddit, on Pinterest, wherever you choose to share your content. That would really appreciate or understand something or learn something from this content on to improve their writing, improve their suspense writing, improve their horror stories, whatever it is that they're writing. Because that's the whole reason why I create this content for you. I want to share advice, tips, and help you all become better storytellers. Thanks for stopping on by, and I'll see you in the next one.